Well, sorry about the high definition state of my skin. Didn't apply my cream much this weekend, but I got to get this recorded, so let's get it done. This is the recap. This is trying to bring you up to speed, make sure you remember everything from the last lecture, okay? So, number one is the Analects of Confucius. Remember, for Confucius, as for really any of the virtue theorists, whether it's Plato or Aristotle, they're interested in creating a person who is a good member of a good society. So the ethics and the politics are necessarily mingled together. Aristotle, painted that middle road, that golden mean thing. For Confucius, he basically gives us two phrases. He says filial piety and fraternal submission. That is to say, the goal is to all be brothers that support one another. So fraternal submission, and that we always look to our elders for the guidance that's right and true. And that's very important to remember, that tradition is right, according to Confucius. If we will just follow the path of the person who pursues the good and the true, who always puts the others ahead of himself or herself, that they're completely caught up in maintaining a search for the truth, that you will acquire the right habits and the right way of life so that you will be a good member of the culture and a good person in general. Mo Tzu extends that in his concept of universal love. Remember that we looked at the three Greek words for love. Philia, philos, is the kind of love, the kind of brotherly love that we see in Mo Tzu. But we also have eros, and we also have agape, and agape is love sort of through the divine, that it's the kind of love that is more than just brotherly, but less physical than eros. It's a tie that's through the spirit, that's divine. But that's not what Mo Tzu is looking at. Mo Tzu is looking at brotherly love, the love of the community, the love that binds us all together as a people. Now, that brings us to the Gita. In the Gita, we see that there are three paths to the good life: the path of action, the path of knowledge, and the path of devotion. Each one superior to the one that precedes it. Knowledge is not as good as action is not as good as knowledge, because after all, the goal is ultimately transcend the physical, and so you don't want to have to act. You want to reach the point where action happens through inaction. Knowledge is good, and knowledge will get you there, but it's not. Action is good, and action will get you there, but better still is knowledge. Knowledge is good. Knowledge will get you there, but knowledge still involves involving yourself with the world. What you're looking to, of course, is to transcend the world, to go beyond the world, to escape the wheel of reincarnation. And in order to do that, devotion is best of all. Devotion eventually will bring us to where mouse batteries are low. I may have to get up here in a second. But anyway, the point of all this is simply that the ethics, morality, goodness in the Gita consists of you yourself moving toward that place of inaction, separation from the world, and whatever you do helps forward others toward that same path. Not everyone is as far down the path as you or capable of being where you are, but nothing you do should get in their way of their path, okay? That's the thing to keep in mind. Maududi talks to us about political theory, and bear in mind, as we already saw in Aristotle, as we already talked about with Confucius, the political and the ethical are seen as images of one another. One larger, the political, the other smaller, the ethical, but that they are necessarily tied and resemble each other. Having said that, then, the political theory in Maududi's work says that we are not the source of sovereignty. That the source of sovereignty isn't our humanity. It is not our what the divine has given us. God alone, Allah alone, is the source of sovereignty. God alone rules. So anyone who understands the Word of God, the Quran, who can make sense of it and explain it to others, is justified in being a member of the ruling community. So he argues for us for democracy. But he does point out that the other persons in the society, those who aren't good Muslims, aren't good believers, aren't submitting to the will of Allah, those persons, because they are not knowledgeable, because they are not submitted, they have no right to rule. They have rights to be treated fairly. They are expected to be ethical and are treated ethically as well. They're expected to be good members of the community and should be good members of the community as well, but they are not able to rule. They do not show the true knowledge and the true understanding of God because they aren't Muslims. I mean, it's just that simple. Okay, I think that pretty well covers what I want you to know about that, okay? And then that brings us at last to Kant. Kant gives us the idea that nothing is good except a good will. Now let's keep in mind here what we're saying. We started out with the conception of the good as being that which creates a good society, creates a good person in a society, and we look at the whole person, the whole package. You know, Aristotle tried to paint us the image of a person who should behave thus in such a way. Even the Buddha, you know, is teaching us a way we should behave, the kind of person we should be working toward, not prescribing or even requiring any particular actions, merely a pattern of behavior that will eventually lead to goodness. I mean, that's that whole thing with Confucius, where he said, you know, if you're acting like this way at 20, then you'll be acting this way at 30, and by the time you get to be 70, then anything you do will be perfectly good because that's who you are. You become a good person by having accrued that kind of habit. And that is the goal, after all, of the Hindu teaching, you know, that we are working toward becoming the kind of person. We're not worried about individual actions, we're worried about becoming a certain kind of person. Now, with Kant, we're worried about individual actions. Because what makes something good is a good will. So it's that willing, that thought process, that intellectual, psychological, spiritual, whatever it is the will is, that process that makes something good. So a good will. And the whole point of the categorical imperative is to let you identify which willings are good willings. How would you know otherwise? And we have the three rules, you know, the three versions of the categorical imperative. Number one, that you act so that the maximum of your action can become universal law. You would will it to become universal law. Now, this is important. When we're saying universal law, we're not talking about you'd like everybody to behave that way. What we're talking about is that it's a logically consistent way, that everyone could behave that way. Not that they would or should, but that they could. We don't want to confuse the universal law here with some kind of legislation. It's not a directive. Instead, it's to be understood as, you know, like the law of gravity or the speed of light, or it would be a thing that you just had to do. But it's not something you cooked up because you're a human being like legislations are. It's a natural way of the world, and you know you have discovered the natural way of the world, the orderly path the world follows, when it's a thing that you can do all of the time, logically speaking. And again, the great example is of lying, that in order to lie, you have to know the truth. If everybody always lies, then how will we ever know the truth? And if we don't know the truth, then we can't lie. See? So lying leads to a contradiction in itself. You can't do it. You can't lie all the time, because ultimately, if everyone lies all the time, then there won't be any knowledge of the truth. And if there isn't any knowledge of the truth, lying is impossible. Okay, then you have the second formulation. Treat others as ends in themselves. Treat others as ends in themselves and not as means only. We can't help but treat people as means. We are, after all, means to one another. You're a means to a paycheck, I'm a means to a grade. You're a means to having me an audience, and I'm a means to your enlightenment and wisdom. But the important part here is that while we are means, we also should be treating the other as ends. We should be realizing that that other person has their own purpose in the world, their own reality, their own need to exist, and their own way of being in the world. You're not just here as my tool, you're here as your own person. And so it's about dignity, it's about respect, is what Kant's striving toward. And then the third formulation, act. No, not the third formulation. The third formulation is you are both ruler and subject of the kingdom of ends. It is not the case that you can be relieved of following the law because you are subject as well as ruler. It's not the case that you can be relieved of making the law. You must make the law. You must behave in a way that makes the law. So, but you are this thing, and it's about your dignity and about respect again. Okay, that's why I talked about the other night capital punishment, why Kant was in favor of capital punishment. Because if your law that you have prescribed as a murderer is to kill someone, then we must respect your principle of everyone should be killed and kill you. Otherwise, we are not showing you the dignity and the respect to which you as a human being are entitled. Okay, well, that pretty much wraps up my recap of what we've talked about coming to this point. I'm going to cut this one off, and then I'll do one on utilitarianism. In the meantime, we're done. Thanks. Bye.